Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wendy, the Client Relation Manager of Worldwide Path. Today, we are delighted to have Mr. Rafael Anchia, a tax representative from the United States, here to share some insights about U.S. Immigrant Investor Program. I believe the information we are about to share will help answer questions for our audience and our EB-5 investors. Hello, Mr. Rafael. Welcome. It's an honor for us to have you as our guest today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a pleasure to be with you here in Ho Chi Minh City and to be with Worldwide Path. It's a trusted partner in the industry.
Today, we have the opportunity to explore some immigrant aspect of EB-5 immigrant projects. So let's begin our conversation. What aspect do you look for when selecting an immigration partner? And why have you decided to work with Worldwide Path?
Well, it's really important when you're working in a market that you have a long history in, but where you find a partner that knows not only the people, but really is able to understand their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, and then it has an excellent reputation. In EB-5, investors are very particular. They ask a lot of questions. They need to build trust face to face. And that's why when working with partners here in Vietnam, we wanted to work with Worldwide Path because people come to you, they know you in the community, and they trust you.
Thank you. So it's clear that choosing the best immigration partners hold great potential for our investors. So let's moving on to the next questions, which is quite intriguing. So how long does it usually take for I-5 to 6E approval for rural tea investment projects?
So since the passage of the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act, we're really in a new world with EB-5. This new law created a specific category for rural investment. Now, rural investment, as we know, are in communities outside of a metropolitan statistical area and in towns less than 20,000 people. Investment in these types of communities allow investors to get an expedited processing. Congress wanted to make sure in this law that rural investors were treated faster than other investors. And the second thing that they did, really helpful to EB-5 investors, is that they set aside 20% of all the visas in EB-5 for these rural investors. Now, what we're starting to see in the marketplace is that USCIS is approving investors in much faster time. The first note that was reported in the media was that a rural investor had received their I-526 within 11 months. More recently, we are seeing investors in rural projects get approved for conditional green cards within 90 days or 6 months. So USCIS is really acting on this congressional intent and expediting investments in rural projects.
Thank you for the information. Wow, 90 days indeed quite fast.
It is, it really is.
So moving on to the next questions. The reason why projects in rural tea get approved faster and what benefits investor gets in these areas?
Okay, so the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act said for investments in rural projects, we're going to give you the fastest processing possible. It is what's called expedited processing. And in addition to that expedited processing, we're going to give you a 20% set aside on visas. Now, for investors in places like Vietnam that historically, under the old program, had waited for a long time and were subject to backlogs and lines called retrogression, in the new program, Vietnamese investors who invest in rural projects have been getting their approvals within much faster timeframes, whether it's 11 months or 6 months or 3 months we've even seen in the marketplace. So there's a real advantage to investing in rural projects, and that's what we're hearing from Vietnamese investors, that they want to get in the fast line.
So now that we understand the benefits of the EB-5 investment projects, so what are some of the risks to consider?
Well, when you're investing in a rural market, by definition, rural markets are smaller. They're less populated. And so you have to choose wisely. Oftentimes, those markets are very small for a reason, because there's less economic activity that is happening in those markets. So what we've tried to do is look at the top rural markets in the country, those that have demand drivers like seasonal home ownership, like tourism, or like mature real estate markets where you have comparables that go back decades. It's really important to invest in mature markets, mature real estate markets, because you may have a rural area that has had very little economic activity. However, for rural areas that have mature real estate markets, you see comparables for multifamily, for residential, for hotels, and those are the markets that you really want to be investing in.
So understand the risk will absolutely empower investors to make well-informed decisions.
No
So
question.
thank you very much. Your guidance is deeply appreciated. So as you might be aware, there have been some problem with recent EB-5 projects, and in some cases that had led to clients not successfully immigrating. So which can be confusing. Can you please explain how to pick a good investment project that is less risky?
Yeah, so in the past, under the old program, we had seen criminal activity, outright frauds, people getting their money stolen. And that's what gave rise to the Reform and Integrity Act of 2022. Congress was concerned about that, and they wanted to make sure that only very serious market participants remained in the program. And so when you're evaluating a regional center operator with which to work, you want to look at a couple of things. One, you want to look at a long track record. Did they just start their business a few years ago, or are they very familiar with EB-5, and have they been in the business for a long time? Second thing you want to look at is to see if they're in your due diligence of regional center operators, if they've had problems in the past. For example, have they been fined by the Securities and Exchange Commission? That's all public information. Have they had projects that have failed? You got to ask those questions. Have they ever lost investor money? You have to ask that question too. So that your partner that you're going to be with in a long relationship, probably a relationship that's going to last, I don't know, anywhere between 4 to 7 years, right? You have to ask the tough questions up front to make sure that they're working on your behalf, that they've had good success with other investors, and that they've never had a problem with any of the regulators in the marketplace, like USCIS or the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Thank you for sharing. Now you already talked about a regional center. Now can you please share about the projects, how to make it less risky?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because not only do you need to work with somebody who has experience and who's trusted, the project itself that you invest in should minimize risk for the investor. So the questions that you need to ask are, where are you in the capital stack, in the financing? Are you in a less risky position, like a debt position, or in an equity position, where you may have higher returns, but you're taking on more risk? My view is that Vietnamese investors historically have wanted to be in a debt position to reduce risk, and so they have recourse or the ability to take over the project if in fact there's a problem with the project. What kind of guarantees are you getting as an investor? Are you getting a completion guarantee, which means that the jobs will be created for your immigration benefit? You absolutely need to create those jobs for you. How do you get your money back? What is the strategy for return of capital? You need to ask, hey, is it a sale that we're projecting? Are we going to be refinancing this project? Is it a short-term hold, a long-term hold? All of those things that are in place help reduce the risk for the investor, not only on an immigration basis, but also for return of capital. And finally, I think this is something that people don't talk about enough, but is it a massive project? Is the market going to have enough investors in it to fund the size of the project? So sometimes you see EB-5 projects with 200 investors or 300 investors that they're asking for. Is the size of the market globally or in Vietnam big enough to support that type of investment? Because if you're investor number 5 in a 15-person investment, your risk may be lower of that actually getting funded. But if you're investor number 5 in a 200-person, 200 EB-5 investor project, that could actually increase your risk. So these are some of the questions that folks should ask. And I know that WWP, in doing its due diligence, asks these tough questions.
Thank you for sharing. So understands these risks will help the investors have the crucial decision. So thank you for highlighting both the benefits and the risks. So moving on, let's talk about the dreams and aspirations. So as you may know, everyone has dreams, and the American dreams is something that most people from other countries aspire to. Can you please share your American dream with the audience?
Sure, I'm happy to. And EB-5 is very personal for me, not just because of the work we do to help families invest in the United States, But ultimately, it's about accessing the American dream and taking your family from where it is now to where you dream it to be. And for me, I've been living this personally. My parents came as immigrants from Mexico and Spain in the mid-1950s. They came with modest background, with very little education, but the United States gave them an opportunity to work hard, an opportunity to get educated, an opportunity to raise their children in an environment where we went in one short generation from really goat herders and sheep herders like my grandfather and my father to lawyers, elected officials, business leaders in community. And that happened so fast. There was no way that trajectory and that dream would have existed in either of the countries that they came from. It was only in America that we could move as a family so quickly. And that's why we call it the land of opportunity. I've seen it personally, and it's one of the things that in our company, we try to bring to the rest of the world.
So your American dream is truly inspiring. So before we conclude, I'd like to ask you the final questions. Additionally, could you offer some advice for people who share a similar dream and aspire to achieve it based on your own experience and journey?
Well, for those of you that are considering investing in the United States through the EB-5 program, I would share the following. I would say that you're projecting your dreams and your hopes and your aspirations for yourselves or for your children onto this decision is a very personal thing. It's one that you have to be very, very comfortable with within your family, and then with the partners that you select, whether it's your immigration lawyer, a regional center, or your local partner like Worldwide Path. I would say that it is worth it, that it is a potentially life-changing choice that one can make. And it really can be empowering for not only yourselves, but really for your children. If your children are successful EB-5 investors, they will be bilingual, speak English well. They'll be binational, the ability to work in your home country and in the United States. And then they'll be bicultural. They'll understand how business is done in places like Vietnam and also in the United States, the #1 market in the world. They will really have no choice but to be successful. And EB-5 helps create that opportunity in America to live that American dream.
So thank you, Mr. Rafael, for sharing such insights of you. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Wendy, thanks so much. I want to say thank you also to Worldwide Path. It's been a pleasure to work together.